Gabe's piece on Laura Loomer, which we'll talk about with him in a second, basically says what I've heard, a lot of people have heard, but Gabe has extraordinary blind quotes, which Laura Loomer says he just made up, like put in ChatGPT, write a few blind quotes. Gabe will explain without revealing his sources how that's not true. But basically says a lot of people in the White House and the administration around the president believe that Laura Loomer's activities are not totally based on her profession of loyalty to the president, but may be based on being paid directly or indirectly by corporate interests. And I have some reason to believe that Gabe's piece is correct, not just because he's a credible reporter, but some of the things I've heard too. So great reporting by Gabe. We'll talk about that, and maybe Gabe and I will read the Laura Loomer tweets together so you can see her response. And let's talk about Gabe's story. Gabe wrote recently another story about Laura Loomer, and today he advances the story beyond the New York Times and others have, and Axios has written a ton about Loomer and her relationship with her colleagues. But Gabe, talk about the path-breaking piece you've done and why it's caused such a reaction already.
Yeah, so we had run a story in the Free Press that went up earlier today quoting 5 Trump administration officials and then different other sources close to the White House who were describing either skepticism or suspicion about sort of like Laura Loomer's motives as far as going after officials in the administration and pointing to us, at least in their telling, certain examples that they believe, are indicative of, or at least allow them to question her motives, which again, Laura Loomer, so, right-wing journalist, opposition researcher, activist, those are the 3, I think, phrases that she would use to describe herself.
Friend of the president.
Friend of the president, boxer with Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Former guest on this program.
She chained herself to Twitter in 2018 in New York City.
Yeah.
She said that she goes after Donald Trump, based on loyalty to the president. And I think there's a few different examples that officials just increasingly, were telling me that they thought they were drawing questions about that. And I think just one I would point to is recently, and I think this was the main example that people pointed to us to, but recently Loomer had gone after Vinay Prasad, a top Food and Drug Administration official, and criticized him for being a purported progressive leftist saboteur. Those were her words. And then she took kind of an out-of-context video from a podcast in which she made some comments about the pandemic and said that he said he stabbed a Trump voodoo doll or something akin to that. But anyway, Loomer was criticizing him based on some partisan lines, and that coincided with the Wall Street Journal running a few stories criticizing Prasad for, at the FDA, halting shipments of a gene therapy drug, as well as some of his other policies. And then not before long, we don't know an overt connection between those two things, but not before long, Prasad was gone at the FDA.
Although he's been brought back.
Yeah, so he was reinstated after HHS Secretary RFK and Marty McCary had lobbied Susie Wiles to bring him back, essentially. But one thing that people had kind of pointed us to that they were looking into in the White House or otherwise was the fact that there's a lobbying firm that in June, Michael Best Strategies, that had registered a lobby on behalf of Sarepta, the pharmaceutical company that the drug maker of the drugs that Prasad had halted shipment of, and that there's some Republican connections of that firm.
Right. So I'm going to make a few points, ask a couple questions before we get to the joy of reading Laura's tweets in response to Gabe's piece. And I want Mark to be able to ask some questions of Gabe as well. A few things. First of all, the quotes are quite something, and they're all anonymous. So Gabe, first of all, why should people trust, who are skeptical of the media, that these are people, not just real quotes, but people of standing who if we knew who they were, we'd say, well, it's significant that they're saying this about Laura Loomer, because you don't characterize them except to say they're White House officials or administration officials.
Yeah, look, if it was my choice, I would absolutely love to put all these people's names in a story. Obviously, I would always veer toward, the opportunity to quote people on the record. But when you're talking to, officials in the government or otherwise, of course, they're not, in the comm shop or otherwise, oftentimes. And so you're not really, that's not a feasible thing. But yeah, all these people, the officials we identified, right, work in the Trump administration, work in the White House.
Yeah. So Laura Loomer makes no bones about the fact that she's a business person. So some of her activities, she says, she does to help the president make sure there's no one disloyal in the government. But she has corporate clients. And just to be clear, and Gabe makes this clear in the story, no one has any proof. No one's got a contract or any evidence, but it's news that this is the accusations of people who work around the president. And they suggest, as your story suggests, they're sick of this. They're sick of this dynamic where someone they believe is doing this sometimes for money still has this extraordinary influence. Lastly, I want to ask you this, and then turn it over to Mark. Laura Loomer responded briefly in your piece, but at length on Twitter. Were you able to interview her, or she just sent you a statement?
We were messaging back and forth throughout basically the day.
Yeah.
A day before we published it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Have you ever spoken to her?
I was trying to interview her for my last story.
Yeah.
And then she pulled out like the last 20 minutes or something. But
yeah. Okay. Mark, questions for Gabe if you have them.
Oh, none. All I can say is his story is 100% accurate. If we were colleagues, I would tell him, if we were in a private setting, exactly who told him all of those things.
Because you know the people who. Yeah, you know the people.
Yeah. I can tell who some of them are down to the language.
Yeah.
I think.
Oh yeah.
So I'm just telling you, that story is accurate.
Yeah. So just as an outsider, not as well versed as you two are, I know there are people in the White House who would look at that piece and say, our goal is to get Laura Loomer out, and we couldn't get her out by criticizing her or saying she's got too much influence or she's too close to the president. So we're going to try to get her out by, or they hope, whether they're the people quoted or not. And there's no doubt, and Mark will, I'm sure, agree, they really believe this. This isn't made up. They really believe it, but they're trying to get her out. Either of you have any reason to believe that this will cause the president to say no more influence, Laura?
I don't think they're trying to get her out per se. They would prefer that. People have been trying to do this with Laura and the relationship with the president since the campaign. What I think they're reasonably trying to do is just tell her, look, knock it the fuck off. Just stop causing so many problems. And I think this is a sort of a shot across it's just a way to just say quit or, stop causing so many problems. Now, Laura's a hellraiser, so I don't think she's going to stop causing problems.
Yeah. Mark, Gabe, did you have a sense of the motivation of your sources?
I generally would agree with Mark. I think it's the aim of those officials and other people is to sort of, just shot across the bow to tell Laura that, it's not just people on Twitter publicly speculating about who funds her or who may not fund her, but actually it is people in the government, and they are quite frustrated. Yeah. I will say, we quoted another official, and in a prior story, another one, a former official who recently departed an agency, who weren't necessarily as antagonistic of Laura. They view her as advantageous to send her information and dig on their rivals in the administration. Yeah. And I think the other important thing about this, you asked, is this going to mean that Trump distances from Laura? I don't think so, but I also think that the issue of Laura's influence in the government pervades far beyond President Trump. I think there's officials at places like the Department of Justice, the Department of State, and otherwise, right-wing officials, political appointees who very much would be happy to be DMing with her and send her dirt. And that's something that Trump can't and is not going to be able to control.
Yeah. Want more great clips like that? I've got an idea. Hit the subscribe button, be part of the Two-Way community, never miss a clip, and you can always watch our full episodes, join them live, go to twoway.tv.